can't live by bread alone. Yeah, this word got food in it. Stepping on the devil dome, you should see the bruise in it. Backing out the scripts, told a demon to stand down. Go against the Most High, we gon' see how it pan out. The Father gave me hope, fill me with the ghosts. Now they hate it when I glow. Joseph with the coat, looking for their fruit, but they ain't got no cantaloupe. The Messiah or Belial, you can't be a fan of both. Can't serve two masters. Bread of heaven with the living water, yeah, he's serving up a true platter. We ain't idolizing no folly, now we setting up a new standard. When Christ touched down, make the whole earth shake like Bruce Banner. Yeah, bringing them troops to ya. End times getting spookier, warfare getting nuclear, mankind getting goofier. They intoxicated with a wine, damn, she done roofied them. I'm checking every word, spirit doctrine like a proofreader. I hate these Nicolatans, hate these great Renatos, man, I hate these flipping pagans. Try to play my father and I hate these imitations. Screaming out Hosanna, we escape that simulation. Better flee to me, vote these or else that lake is where you layin'. Great is he inside of me, casting out this net like I was by the Sea of Galilee. Harvest gon' be plenty, but the laborers are few. Matthew 17 and 20, there ain't nothing we can't do. I can't be no lukewarm, fringes with the blue on. Devil wanna deal, but I told him this ain't Groupon. Praise to the Almighty, you know we gon' sing a new song. Hail the King of King, the Ultra Low, no Jimmy Neutron. If you keep his laws and his commands, then we can fellowship. I don't get with Pharisees and I don't rock with Hellenists. I ain't praising man, cause only Father get my reverence. I'm swimming in the word, it got me feeling like a yellowfin. Yeah, big stepper, Mr. Demon Chin Checker, trying to hear that well done, cause I feel that displeasure. Father pouring out the wrath, and he got a big measure. If it ain't about the kingdom, then I don't give a six letter. You got faith in the Messiah, you got power. I was clean up in that blood just like a shower. Isaiah 5, you were the vine that came out sour, but now we stand and giving glory in this hour. Yeah, we breaking them curses, fleeing the ways of the serpent. Follow his word and pray for discernment, cause they want us laying in hearses. We gotta rise up, raise and resurface. Choose life and stay in your purpose. The price was paid like a merchant, through Christ who came as a servant. See, the kingdom is ready to bag, but yet somehow they chasing a Birkin. After this you ain't getting a chance, while you living you can't better search him. Gotta call on his name like his urchin, never knowing that day is emerging. So repent at the weight of perversions, judgment coming, that thing is for certain. Let's go.
Shalawam family, it's your brother Yasharahla from the House of Bread, and I have to give all praises, all glory, and all honor to the Most High God, whose name is Yahawaah. Of course, I do so in the name of His only begotten Son, Hamashiach, Yahawashi, who the world ignorantly calls Jesus Christ. Make sure you make your way over to HIBofficialZion.com and get you a copy of the HIB, the Hebrew Israelite Bible. Shalawam, Kwam Yasharahla.
The Hebrew Israelite Bible is the first of its kind, restoring the names of persons, places, and things in the ancient Hebrew dialect, colloquially referred to amongst the Israelite community as the Lashawan Quadash. Most importantly, it preserves the Most High's name Yahawah in the Paleo-Hebrew script. The Hebrew Israelite Bible comes complete with all 80 books found in the 1611 King James Version Bible, including the Apocrypha.
All right, Shalawam family. First and foremost, I want to give all praises, all glory, and all honor to the Most High God, whose name is Yahawaah. Of course, I do so in the name of His only begotten Son, Hamashiach, Yahawashi, who the world ignorantly calls Jesus Christ. It's Brother Yasharahla, and we today will be diving into a topic, right? Following up on last week Friday's presentation. Now, this lesson today will not be as in-depth as last week. I did not create a presentation for this particular lesson. I have been working on last week's lesson for honestly 3 weeks, right? So today we're going to be diving into who Moses could potentially be in the in the Egyptian record, rather, right? In the Egyptian record, right? So Again, family, if you're new to the channel, make sure you guys hit that subscribe button, hit that bell icon so that you get notified whenever your boy goes live, whenever we drop any videos. And make sure you guys thumb up the video. When the video is over, right now, this is live. When the live is over, come back and hype the video, right? Hyping the video helps push this information in the algorithm, right? So again, please make sure that you like, share, subscribe, and hype the videos, right? Liking, commenting, things of that nature helps, of course, like I said, push this information through the algorithm, right? Especially, you know, as Hebrew Israelites, we have a very niche, you know, platform here on YouTube. You know, it's not like Christianity where you have billions of so-called Christians all over the world. Okay, this is an exclusive thing, so we need all the help we can get to push this message to the four corners of the earth, so that we can, of course, get the hell up on out of here. All right. Let me just take a look at something real quick. How y'all doing today, family? Before we dive in, if anyone has any questions, go ahead. I'll do a little Q&A for the first like 5-10 minutes. Any questions, go ahead and drop your questions in the chat. Again, if you have not, right, if you have not watched last week's last week's lesson, you definitely missed out on a good one. All right, so here we go. Here we go. Boom. So last week we went into who is the Pharaoh of the Exodus, right? Great presentation through the spirit and power of Yahawashi. Right. We went through a ton of information. We demonstrated how the Pharaoh of the Exodus is not Ramses II, as popularly believed by many scholars, as portrayed in Hollywood, right? Because when we look at Ramses II, his successor, Merneptah, he reigns for 10 years, and in the 5th year of his reign, he's speaking of the nation of Israel as if they're already an established people, right, in the land of Canaan. So that proves emphatically that it did not happen during the 19th dynasty. We briefly talked about the Hyksos. We demonstrated how we understand and know when biblical events and how they align with a modern Gregorian AD, BC, or BCE, CE dating convention. All right, that was all due to the discovery of the Assyrian Limu system, right, or the eponym system, where they named each year for a particular ruler. What scholars did was they found that in a particular year there was a total solar eclipse, and they were able to date that to 563 BCE. And with that said, they were able to establish when certain biblical events happened. Now, when we look at 1 Kings chapter 6, it says that Solomon began to build the temple in the 4th year of his reign, and it happened to be the 480th year after the children of Israel made their exodus out of Egypt, right? So that puts our biblical exodus date of 1446 BCE, which aligns with the 18th dynasty and 19th dynasty, right? As we look forward, we found that Amenhotep II, that this is the Pharaoh of the Exodus, right? So now the question is, well, who potentially is Moses, right? Who is Moses within the Egyptian record, right? And that's what we will be venturing to discuss and potentially determine today, right? So we're going to look at actually we're going to be looking at an article from the Armstrong Institute of Biblical Archaeology, right? And then I'm going to read some portions from a book This is a book called Dynasty of Slaves. You can find it on Amazon. It's a relatively inexpensive book. It's about like 12, 13 bucks. And it's written by a Christian pastor, and I believe he has like a master's in biblical studies and in history as well. So very interesting book. I've read the entire book except for I didn't finish the last chapter, but pretty much the entire premise was laid out throughout the first 7 chapters, right? But I'm going to read some portions of the 4th and the 5th chapter of this particular book. And I think what we'll do is I'll dive into this book first, because I'll be honest, I'm leaning more so to the individual that is laid out in the Armstrong Institute of Biblical Archaeology. I'm leaning towards their conclusion on who the Pharaoh of the Exodus, not Pharaoh of the Exodus, who Moses is in the Egyptian record. So let me go ahead and share my screen real quick. Again, family, a lot of times what happens is YouTube will not send out notifications, right? Now, my old channel, I had right around 11,000 subscribers, and we've been, of course, building this channel back up from the ground up. We're at around 3,500 subscribers. But of course, YouTube does not push out the information to all of the subscribers, right? So this is why it's important that brothers and sisters like, share, comment, hype the video, so that YouTube will push it to in the algorithm, and of course push it to the subscribers, right? So in order to make sure that you are abreast with everything that is House of Bread, everything, all the lessons, there is a broadcast channel on Instagram, right? So all of my social media is at the bottom, right? Actually, let me switch. Boom, boom, boom. Right, all of my social media is at the bottom. So at LionOfYahawah on Instagram, TikTok, Twitch, and X. Soon I'm going to start doing some these live streams on Twitch. So if anyone's on Twitch, we'll be over there as well. Right, you can follow me on Facebook as well at Yasharahla. Now, here on Instagram, I put every video that we do, right? Every video that we do, any live, any new video drop, I'll let you know, right? So make sure that you tap in. If you're on Instagram, tap in with this broadcast channel. I'm going to drop the link right now here in the chat. All right. Here in the chat, you can click this link. This will take you to the broadcast channel on Instagram. Additionally, make sure that you're following the camp, right? At House of Bread on Instagram, at House of Bread with underscores in between each word. Additionally, right, of course, we teach our people to keep the commandments, right? Tap in with your boy at Gedalia Ariala on Instagram. Get you a pair of bust down tassels, right? I got the black joints on right now. All praise to the Most High. But tap in with me, DM me, and I'll definitely get you right, okay? So tap in with us here. And also tap in with the brother Yasharahla with his tassel page. He makes your regular daily tassels. These are made out of satin. Tons of different jewels and options for any occasion, right? So tap in with all of our tassel pages here on Instagram, right? So let's get out of here, right? And let's move that. Oh, here we go. So we're gonna dive into this book, right? Also, right here in the top right corner, you can scan this code to get you a copy of the Hebrew Israelite Bible available at hibofficialzion.com, right? So you just scan that. It'll take you right to the website to make your purchase, right? So again, we're going to be reading this book, some portions of this book. This is called Dynasty of Slaves, Uncovering the Archaeological Record of Israel in Egypt, all right? And what I'll do is I'll put a link to this book in the description of the video, all right? So let's dive into it. will we be doing calendars? Or do you mean like actual printout calendars? Is that what you're talking about, Ra'ashiath? All praise to the Most High. Yeah, this is this my brother Ibadia? Yeah, shout out to my brother Ibadia, man. So I made of course the Knicks won the championship this year, man. I'm not a Knicks. I'm from New York, but I'm not a Knicks fan. I'm a Lakers fan. But my little brother, he is a Lakers fan, and I made these last year, all right, where the Knicks didn't make it to the finals, right? Made these, right, for the Knicks in 6. Of course, now it's Knicks in 5, right? So we got different colors. So instead of doing the black, I could actually do like the white/silver, and again, any option, right? Any team, whatever team that you're a fan of, right? I more than likely can make a set of tassels that'll fit what you got going on. Shout out to this sister, right? She got the pink joints, right? This was a set, had the light pink with the hot pink. She just did her thing with that, right? That's this set right here. All praise to the Most High, right? Various different colors. Again, let's say you're a Bengals fan, right? Boom, this is perfect if you're a Bengals fan, right? We rocked these for Passover this past year, right? The red representing the blood of Yahawashi. So, I mean, we got tons of different flavors over here at Gedalia Arial. So tap in with us, family. All praise to the Most High, right? So, okay, you asked a question. Someone else asked a question. All praise to the Most High. All right, so boom, let's dive into this book, right? So this is chapter 4. It's called "Rescued from the Nile," right? So he's laying the case of who Moses is, again, in the Egyptian record. And again, I will be putting the link to this book that brothers and sisters can purchase. What I like about this book is that this individual, he laid out an actual timeline of the Israelites in Egypt towards the back. And then what he also did was he has an appendix with all different sources, resources, and further readings that brothers and sisters can do, right? So we got Egyptian inscriptions, archaeological reports, and site data. What else we got? Like for instance, I'm gonna read one of the sources, right? So it's something known as Hagar El Merwa, right? And it's something known as the Kurgus inscription, Kurgus inscriptions. So an individual by the name of Vivian W. Davies, and her paper, the Kurgus inscriptions, Thutmose I and Thutmose III, Sudan and Nubia, from 2003. The findings were rock inscriptions marking the southernmost boundary of the Egyptian Empire. The reports list Prince Amenmose, right? So who this individual, this particular scholar, he lays out a case for an individual by the name of Amenmose being Moses in the Egyptian record, right? So in this inscription, the reports list Prince Amenmose, the eldest son of Thutmose I, as the great overseer of soldiers. Amenmose's subsequent total disappearance from the Egyptian royal record, leaving the throne to his younger brother Thutmose II, aligns with the biblical timeline of Moses' flight into Midian around 1486 BC, right? So he makes an interesting case for this individual by the name of Amenmose. Now, what I will say is that who Moses is in the Egyptian record, I'm gonna tell you who he's not, right? So we were taught while I was a member of Sakari, we were taught that there was an individual by the name of Amin Mies, right? Amin Mies. So let me go ahead and share my screen real quick. Boom. Right? We were taught that this was Moses, right? We were taught that this was Moses, Amin Mies, right? And that an individual by the name of Sentanke was the Pharaoh of the Exodus, right? And several problems with that, right? So Amin Mies is actually a pharaoh of the 19th dynasty. Nowhere in the biblical record does it state that Moses actually reigned as pharaoh. Okay. Now, this guy reigned for about 3-4 years. His name is Amin Misi or Amin Mos, right? He's said to be a usurper, right? Which isn't uncommon, actually, when you look at the last two pharaohs of the 18th dynasty, which we've established is the time frame in which the biblical exodus would have occurred. It would have been during the 18th dynasty. This just doesn't make sense, right? Then the individual that they said was, in fact, the pharaoh of the Exodus was an individual by the name of Sentanke, who is a pharaoh of the 20th dynasty, right? I saw a video earlier today, right? So Sentanke, he's the first pharaoh of the 20th dynasty. That does not make sense, right? Makes zero sense for Sentanke to be the pharaoh of the Exodus. And with that said, for this guy named Amin Mies to be Moses, right? So there's no way that is the case, okay? So now let's dive into this book, right? So there is an individual named Prince Amin Mos who fits within the 18th dynasty, okay? So here we are in chapter 4, right? This is on page 51. It says, follow me to the year 1526 BC. If you could stand in the ramparts of the great white walls of Memphis in the specific year, you wouldn't feel the peace of a stable empire. You would feel the vibration of a war machine that has been running hot for decades. And the air in the northern Egypt is thick with the smell of the river and the constant grinding activity of military camps. To understand the story that is about to unfold, we have to strip away the soft pastel imagery of children's storybooks. We have to forget the quiet pastoral scenes of a baby floating gently among the reeds while birds chirp in the background. The real story didn't happen in a scenic park. It happened in a war zone. In the South, in the ancient religious capital of Thebes, the pharaohs might sit as king of tradition and ritual surrounded by incense and priests. But here in the North, in the city of Memphis, they are generals sitting in a high-stakes war room. This is the headquarters of the 18th dynasty's obsession, security. For the last few years, the Egyptian state has been consumed by a single existential security threat. In the official state records, they call this population of foreigners the pestilence, right? Who's this population of foreigners? The Hyksos, right? Which I would dare to venture and say are the Israelites, right? Let's continue. It goes on to say, they describe them as a disease that must be purged from the pure body of Egypt. It is the classic language of genocide. It is always easier to enslave a people after you have systematically dehumanized them first. This atmosphere of suspicion didn't appear overnight. It is the direct result of a century of humiliation and desperation struggle for survival. So when we take a look at the 18th dynasty, right? The 18th dynasty was established by Amos the First, right? He had his father was a pharaoh, was the second to last pharaoh of the 17th dynasty, and then his brother Kamos, he was the last pharaoh of the 17th dynasty. His father started the campaign against the Hyksos, right? So if you could imagine, you have ancient Egypt. Upper Egypt is in the south. Lower Egypt is in the north, right? So Goshen, where the Israelites were, that's known as Lower Egypt, right? It's in the north. So you had the Hyksos ruling there, and they were exacting tribute from the 17th dynasty, okay? And again, they're foreigners. So there's resentment, rightfully so, from who? From the Egyptians, right? The native Egyptians. So Kamos, he dies in battle, and then next is Amos. He establishes the 18th dynasty, and he's the one that actually conquers Avaris, which was the capital of the Hyksos dynasty, where we again archaeologically see a large Semitic population being there, right? That abruptly ends in the 18th dynasty, in the middle of the 18th dynasty, around the reign of Amenhotep II, who is our pharaoh of the Exodus. Yeah, so the Nile River, right? The Nile River starts south, right? You have the Blue Nile and the White Nile. That I believe the Blue Nile is in Ethiopia, White Nile is in Sudan, or maybe vice versa. I forget exactly. And they feed into the main Nile River, and the Nile River flows north. It's the only river in the world that flows north, right? Most rivers flow south. So with that established, right, it would have been Amos the first, establishing the 18th dynasty, taking the Hyksos out of power, and of course enslaving the population, right, which would have been the Israelites living in that land, right? So here we are, right? The atmosphere, we're on page 52. That this atmosphere of suspicion didn't appear overnight. It is the direct result of a century of humiliation and a desperate struggle for survival. The story is the basket of the Nile bridges, the gap from the back breaking forced labor of the mud pits to the marble floors of the palace. But to understand why the baby in the basket changed the world, you first have to understand the trauma that built the new kingdom, right? So the 18th dynasty starts what's known as the new kingdom. Before that, it's known as the middle kingdom, right? By scholars. Egypt is a nation that suffers from what you might call national PTSD. For over a century, the Hyksos, those Semitic rulers we identified in previous chapters as the family of Jacob, grown into a dynasty, held the north. They had turned the city of Avaris into a fortress, a symbol of Egyptian shame. When the native Theban princes, right? So Thebes is further south, right? That's the capital of most Egyptian dynasties, right? Of course, we got Akhenaten, and he moves the capital to Luxor, which also is known as Amarna, right? So modern day Luxor, Egypt, at the time known as Amarna, right? But anyway, it says when the native Theban princes finally arose up under Amos I, it wasn't just a political change. It was the war for the soul of Egypt, a brutal campaign of ethnic cleansing and nationalistic fervor. The great Pharaoh Amos I eventually broke the siege of Avaris. He chased the Hyksos leadership, the kings, into the Levant and leveled their strongholds. But while the royal class fled, the common people remained. Hundreds of thousands of Shemitic laborers, traders, and shepherds were left behind in the Delta. To the new Egyptian regime, they were a ticking time bomb. These people have been enslaved. They have been purged. Their political leaders have been driven into the desert, but the threat remains. The Egyptian memory is long, and the fear of the second Hyksos uprising is the primary driver of state policy. This is the great fear that haunts the corridors of power in Memphis and eventually gets written into the scrolls of the Torah, right? And then he quotes Exodus 1, verses 9 through 10. It says, behold, the people of the children of Israel are more and mightier than we. Come on, let us deal wisely with them, lest they multiply. And it come to pass that when there falleth out any war, they join also unto our enemies and fight against us. This wasn't irrational paranoia. It was a cold, calculated military threat assessment. And sitting at the center of this high-stakes frontier is a royal couple with a desperate secret of their own, right? So now this next section says married to the throne. Let me introduce to you Pharaoh Thutmose I and his royal great wife, Queen Amos, okay? Thutmose is a warrior king in the truest sense. He is a man who has spent his life on the front lines of expansion, a disruptor who is using Memphis as a launch pad to push Egypt's borders all the way to the Euphrates River. He wants to ensure that no foreign power ever threatens the Nile Valley again. He is building a buffer zone made of brick, iron, and blood. But all of this military prowess, Thutmose has a weakness. His claim to the throne is fragile. He is not a pure descendant of the god kings. His ruling power depends entirely on his wife's bloodline. So Queen Ahmose is the daughter of Pharaoh Ahmose I. She is the living link to the legitimacy of the dynasty and sacred vessel of the throne. So this scholar, he believes that Queen Ahmose, who is the daughter of Pharaoh Ahmose I, that she is the one that adopted Moses, right? We're going to see in another particular source that we'll review that Hatshepsut, a case could be made for her to be the daughter of Pharaoh that Moses, right? So it goes on to say, she is the living link to the legitimacy of the dynasty, the sacred vessel of the throne. She carries the solar blood that the people reverence. Thutmose I sits on the throne only because she sits beside him. Together, they face a massive problem. The line of the liberators is staring down the barrel of extinction. They have no surviving male heir. The royal nursery is silent where it matters most. They have daughters, including the brilliant and ambitious Hatshepsut. So Hatshepsut is the daughter of Thutmose I and Queen Ahmose. Okay, Queen Ahmose is the daughter of Pharaoh Ahmose I. Kind of like, for instance, if anyone watches Game of Thrones, House of the Dragon, you have King Viserys. He ends up having sons, but imagine he didn't have sons, right? Rhaenyra, right? She is the daughter that becomes his heir, right? But she marries someone, and who did she marry? Of course, she married Laenor Velaryon. She had a bunch of bastards with the Strongs. But then in the show, she marries her uncle, right? And the Egyptians did very similar things, right? You had a lot of incest going on in ancient Egypt, right? So again, that royal blood is starting that royal male line is not there, right? So they need an heir, right? So this is the case that he's laying out, right? So it says the royal nursery is silent where it matters most. They have daughters, including the brilliant and ambitious Hatshepsut, but the son they need to secure the succession hasn't appeared. In the brutal mathematics of Egyptian succession, this is a crisis. If Thutmose I dies without a son from the great royal wife, the throne is up for grabs. It will likely pass to a son of a secondary wife, a quote mutt in the eyes of the royal purists, and the sacred line of Ahmose I will be effectively ended. This dynasty is one heartbeat away from collapse. This context transforms the story of Exodus 2. We often view the birth of Moses solely through the lens of Hebrew suffering, the baby hidden to escape the slaughter, but we rarely look at it from the Egyptian perspective. In the palace, there is a desperate hunger for a son. There is a queen under immense pressure to produce a male heir to save her father's legacy. It is a collision of two desperate needs: a Hebrew mother needing to save her son from death, and an Egyptian queen needing a son to save her dynasty. Geography of providence, right? So this is the next section in this chapter. We're in chapter 4, page 54 of this book, Dynasty of Slaves, Uncovering the Archaeological Record of Israel and Egypt. Where are we? While Thutmose is busy planning military campaigns to secure the borders, he is blind to a quiet movement happening right under his nose. It is time to talk about the providential geography of Memphis. When we picture the Hebrews in Egypt, we tend to visualize a monolithic group of slaves toiling in distant, dusty brickyards, far removed from the luxury of the capital. We imagine them isolated in the land of Goshen. While that was true for the vast majority of the tribes, the archaeological record in the biblical text suggests something much more nuanced for the tribe of Levi. The Levites were distinct. While other tribes were conscripted for heavy labor and field work in the store cities of Per Atum, which is Pithom, and Avaris, Ramses, The Levites were often employed in specialized roles. They were the domestic staff. They were the artisans, the administrators, and the low-level priestly support for the Egyptian elite, right? So this makes sense why the Most High chose Levi to be the priests, right? They had that particular experience in, I guess, serving in houses, right? Houses for so-called deities, right? We see a hint of this in 1 Samuel 2:27, where a man of God reminds Eli the priest, "Did I not clearly reveal myself to the house of your father when they were in Egypt under Pharaoh? I chose him out of all the tribes of Israel to be my priest." God was setting apart a priestly tribe even before the Exodus, and is the social structure for the new kingdom. The priestly class of servants lived in the city. They lived in the domestic quarters of the capital. This specialized labor class was effectively a security clearance and meant that the Levites were the ones walking the hallways of the elite. They were the ones scrubbing the floors of the villas, tending to the royal gardens, serving wine at the banquets. They were the ones hearing the whispers of the generals and the complaints of the courtiers. This placement put the Levite community, including a woman named Jochebed and her daughter Miriam, in the immediate orbit of the royal palace in Memphis. They weren't miles away in a mud pit. They were inside the gates. This is the only reasonable explanation for how the events of Exodus 2 could unfold. When the daughter of Pharaoh goes down to the river to bathe, she isn't driving a chariot out of the slave camps. She is walking to the private royal garden along the Nile, adjacent to the palace. And who was watching her? Miriam. Miriam isn't hiding in the swamps miles from civilization. She is standing at a distance to see what would happen to the baby. She is close enough to witness the discovery and bold enough to approach a royal princess to speak to her. That doesn't happen if Miriam is a field slave. Now, again, that makes a lot of sense because, again, Miriam ends up talking with the daughter of Pharaoh, as we see in Exodus, right? It goes on to say, that only happens if Miriam is a domestic servant who knows the protocol, knows the schedule, and perhaps even knows the princess. They understood the Egyptian mind. They knew the layout of the royal villas and the timing of the guards' rotations, and they understood the river. Based on extensive excavations of Memphis, we know the domestic quarters where the servants lived were typically located south of the royal precincts to ensure that the prevailing winds carried the smoke and smells away from the Pharaoh. This means the current flow from the Levite quarters directly past the royal gardens, right? So again, you have Memphis is further south from Goshen. So you got Goshen right here, you got Memphis right here, and they're saying that the slave quarters were south of the palace, and the wind will blow up, right? And the current will go up to what? To the palace, right? So that makes a lot of sense. Let's continue. The path was already paved by water. Jochebed didn't just hope for a miracle. She utilized a logistical inevitability. She knew the mechanics of the delta. She knew that if she placed the ark in the reeds at a specific spot, the relentless, predictable current of the Nile would carry it straight into the private sanctuary of the most powerful woman in the world. If you wanted to smuggle something into the most secure location on earth, you didn't try to break past the guards. You let the river deliver it for you. The destroyer of the dynasty, Israel's deliverer, didn't have to siege the palace. He was carried to the doorsteps of the woman who held the future of Egypt in her hands. He was delivered by the current of the river, the desperation of his mother, and the strategic positioning of a tribe that God had planted behind enemy lines, right? Now, that's very interesting if you just think about an overarching theme we see in the scriptures, right? We see the Most High God destroy the earth with water, right? But bring Noah and his family through the water, deliver them through the water. So even when we just look at creation, right? It says, in the beginning, God created the heavens and the earth was without form and void, and darkness was upon the face of the deep, right? The deep is pre-existing water that when you look at it, it's chaotic, right? Water can either bring life or it could bring death, right? And there's chaos in that. But of course, the Most High God can bring deliverance through that. He brought deliverance to Noah and his family through that water. And then, of course, he delivered Moses, the eventual deliverer of Israel, through the water of the Nile. And then, of course, he delivered Israel from Egypt through the water, through the Red Sea. And then when we entered into the promised land, the Most High God parted the Jordan River, right? So the Most High God is always bringing deliverance through water, right? How we deliver? We are delivered through, of course, our obedience and faith in who the world called Jesus Christ, right? Yahawashi. And in John 6:63, he says, that's not in Ephesians, right? We talk about sanctifying through the washing of the water by the word, right? So the word is likened unto water, right? So let's get back into it. So a good / God idea. The current of the Nile is the most predictable force in the ancient world. It moves with a steady, relentless pull that dictates the life of every person living on its banks. When Jochebed placed the basket in the reed, she was trusting the predictable movement of the Memphis riverfront. Exodus 2 and verse 5 says, "Then the daughter of Pharaoh came down to bathe at the river, and her maidens walked along the riverside. And when she saw the ark among the reeds, she sent her maid to get it. When Queen Amos orders her maidservant to retrieve the basket, she is acting out of curiosity or perhaps the suspicion that the basket carries something specifically for her. She is an elite political operator who understands that nothing in the Memphis palace happens by accident. She opens the basket to find something she never could have expected. It is a child of the pestilence, a Hebrew infant who should have been purged." Exodus 2 and 6 says, "And when she opened it, she saw the child, and behold, the baby wept. So she had compassion on him and said, 'This is one of the Hebrew children.' The child is crying, a sound that actually signals a death sentence for a Hebrew male in this city. A crying baby would have brought the attention of the executioners of the decree. The executors of the decree. But in the moments, Queen Amos sees something else. She sees a blank slate. This is the moment of the political epiphany. She realizes that a child with no Egyptian father can be claimed as a gift from the gods themselves. Such a claim is difficult to deny when the one making the claim is Egypt's own God's wife of Amun, right, quote unquote. The only woman who can stimulate the Egyptian god to help the Egyptian people. Cedar David, no, what's your question, brother? So I don't know about I don't really dive into the whole DNA thing because I don't trust these DNA sites, right? But what we established in the last lesson is that the Hyksos, right? These were foreign Egyptian rulers. They were foreigners that ruled in Egypt, right? So they weren't per se Egyptian. However, when you look at the history of the Israelites, right, we always went down to Egypt, right? That's why the scriptures say, "Woe to him that goes down to Egypt for help," right? Alexandria is in Egypt, had the largest population of Jews in the world outside of Israel, right? Elephantine, right? We were all up in Egypt during the time of Christ and prior to. So, but anyway, where were we? So we're on page 58. We're in chapter 4. It says, "If she adopts this child, he becomes her son. Because she is a great royal wife, her son becomes a legitimate heir regardless of the rival wives and their children. This is a high-stakes legal maneuver. She is choosing to defy the death decree to save the future of her father's dynasty and her husband's legacy. At this exact moment, Miriam steps out of the shadows. She asks if the queen needs a Hebrew nurse. It is a tactical offer that provides the queen with a layer of plausible deniability. If the queen takes the child directly into the palace, the Hyksos origin of the infant will be too obvious to ignore. But if the child is sent away to be nursed in the Hebrew quarters, he can be reintroduced to the court later as a providential discovery. Queen Amos agrees. She even offers to pay wages to the nurse, which creates a formal documented contract between the palace and Jochebed's family. Jochebed is now being paid by the state to raise her own son. The very system that was designed to destroy her family is now funding his survival. When the time for the formal handover arrives, the queen initiates the legal process of Ben La. Right? In the ancient world, this is the formal taking as a son that carries the full weight of the law. The Greeks would later call it ischuion, the place, which is adoption, right? This is the word that's, if I'm not mistaken, is used in Paul's epistles when he talks about the adoption. The placement of a child into the status of a son with full inheritance rights. It is legal transformation that erases his past and replaces it with a royal future. In a single stroke, Moses is made the heir. He is now the child destined to the throne of Egypt. The queen gives him a name that fits the propaganda of the era. She calls him Amun Mos, which means born of Amun. By naming him after the state god Amun Ra, she is claiming that his birth was a divine act of providence. She uses the divine birth propaganda to tell the court that Amun Ra appeared to her in the form of her husband, that the child is the literal seed of the god. Right? This is the story solves two massive problems at once. First, it is effectively erases the child's Hebrew origin. Second, it places him above every other child in the royal nursery. As the son of a god, he outranks the sons of the secondary wives who only carry human blood. He is no longer a refugee now. He is the great overseer of soldiers in training. As he enters the palace as a permanent resident, his education begins in earnest. He is placed under the tutelage of an elite official named Paheri. Paheri represents the new order of the empire. He was the mayor of Nekeb, a high-level administrator who knew the exact cost of every brick and every human life in the empire. But it's not Paheri's resume that should make your skin crawl. It's his bloodline, because to understand the man who was teaching Moses how to think, you have to understand the man who taught Paheri. Paheri's grandfather was Amos, son of Abana. In the history books, he is a hero. In the Hebrew memory, he is the architect of the end. He was the naval commander who spearheaded the final brutal siege of Avaris. He was the man who personally broke the back of the Hebrew presence in the Delta. In the Egyptian military, there were specific awards for that kind of service. It was called the Gold of Valor. These were small golden pendants shaped like flies. Why flies? Because to the Egyptians, the fly was the ultimate warrior. A fly is relentless. It doesn't matter how many times you swatted it. It keeps coming. It is persistent. It is annoying. And ultimately, it feeds on the fallen. Right? Now, what's interesting about that is that when we look at the plagues, one of the plagues was the sand turned into lice and flies. Right? Again, the Egyptians look at the fly as a particular as a good symbol, and of course they had a god for every fucking thing, right? So that's quite interesting. Amos, son of Abana, who these golden flies for his bravery during the sacking of Avaris, for every Hebrew he killed, for every high-ranking official he captured, he was rewarded with land, with gold, and most significantly with servants. Do the math on the irony here. Then it has a picture of this guy's tomb here, right? Tomb of Pahari, El Kab, Moses' tutor, grandson of the architect of enslavement. The very slaves who were serving Pahari's household, the people who likely cooked Moses' food, washed his royal linens, and stood in the corners of the room while he studied, were the survivors of the city his tutor's grandfather had destroyed. When Moses sat in the opulent study, he was looking at a man whose family wealth was literally built on the genocide of his own people. Right? That gives some credence and some more light to what Hebrews 11:24 says. Right? Let me grab it real quick. Hebrews 11:24. Watch this. Hebrews 11:24. It says, By faith, Moses, when he was grown up, refused to be called the son of Pharaoh's daughter, choosing rather to be mistreated with the people of God than to enjoy the fleeting pleasures of sin. Right? So that brings a lot more. There's a lot more weight to that scripture right there. Right? So Moses, he lived, of course, in a lap of luxury. Right? Living in the palace. Right? So where were we? Think about the psychological warfare happening in that room every single day. Moses is sitting there learning his hieroglyphs, the language of the gods, but he is also being groomed for high command. He is being taught the art of the state by the man who perfected the metrics of oppression. But Harry taught him the logistics of labor, the census, the quota system, the cold calculation, and how much work a human body can perform before it breaks. He taught him the military tactics of the composite bow, the chariot, the high-tech tanks of the Bronze Age. And Harry would have been very clear about who the targets of these weapons were. They were the vile Asiatics, the shepherds, the unclean, right? So let me just skip along, right? We're going to skip over to chapter 5, right? It says, when the prince disappears. Let me paint you a picture. It's 1490 BC. We're standing in Thebes, the beating heart of the Egyptian empire. This in Egypt is a technicolor, not the grainy black and white of old movies. It is the height of the 18th dynasty, the golden age of the new kingdom. The temples are painted in brilliant blues and reds. The gold on the pyramidions, the pointed capstones on the obelisks is so bright it hurts your eyes to look at it. Sitting on the throne is Pharaoh Thutmose I. He is a warrior king in the truest sense of the word. He's expanded Egypt's borders further south than anyone, though possible, deep into the kingdom of Kush or modern-day Sudan. He's pushed north to the Euphrates River under his reign. Egypt isn't just a country; it is a superpower. And standing at his right hand is his son. His name is Prince Amenmos, right? He's the crown prince, the heir apparent, and he is just a figurehead waiting for his father to die so he can wear the double crown. He's a man of action. The monuments from this period identify him with a title that had never been given to a king's son before. He is the Emiri Meshawar, the great overseer of the soldiers. He's the general of the army. If you were a betting man in 1490 BC, you would have put every ounce of silver you had on Amenmos becoming the next pharaoh. He had the pedigree. He wielded the power and commanded the absolute loyalty of the military. Known as the Star of Egypt, he was depicted on steles, hunting lions beside his father, the undeniable future. But in the shadows of the court, there was another. His name was Thutmose III. So Thutmose III ultimately became pharaoh. He wasn't the firstborn. He wasn't the designated heir. In the rigid hierarchy of the 18th dynasty, he was a shadow heir, a young, brilliant military prodigy born of a secondary line, watching from the periphery as Amenmos collected the accolades of and the commands. He is fiercely ambitious, possessing a tactical mind that would one day redefine ancient warfare. But as long as the popular general Amenmos stood at the right hand of the pharaoh, Thutmose III was an asterisk in history. For a man of his ambition, being second was the same as being nothing. He watched the crown prince with a growing, quiet resentment. He waited for a crack in the armor. He waited for the Star of Egypt to stumble. And then the general vanished. I don't mean he fades into obscurity. He's erased. Sometime around the year 1486 BC, just 4 or 5 years before his father's death, Prince Amenmos disappeared. He disappears from the historical record. He doesn't die in battle. If he had, there'd be a grand tomb, a massive funeral procession, a temple dedication to his memory. But there's no tomb, there's no mummy, there's no record of his death. One day he's the commander of the armies of Egypt, the most powerful man in the world next to Pharaoh. The next day he's a ghost. And who steps into the vacuum? Technically, the throne passed to a younger half-brother named Thutmose II. But if you look at the archaeological record, Thutmose II was never the great warrior the 18th dynasty demanded. When archaeologists found his mummy, they found a man who was frail, thin, and possibly balding in his youth. His skin was covered in lesions and scabs from a debilitating disease. In reality, Thutmose II was a placeholder. His brief, sickly reign was a puppet era, a political transition orchestrated by the rising military faction that had already begun to rally behind the young, healthy, and ruthlessly capable Thutmose III. While the frail brother sat on the throne, the real power was shifting. Thutmose III was no longer just a shadow heir. He was the emerging force leading the envy against the vanished general. It was during the period that the campaign to purge Amenmos's name from the monuments began. When, with the crown prince gone and the sickly king on the throne, Thutmose III finally had the opening he needed to clear the path for his own legendary destiny. History hates a vacuum. Politics doesn't just happen. Something catastrophic must have occurred in the royal court of Thebes around 1486 BC, something that removed the general from the board and allowed a military prodigy to effectively leapfrog over the direct line of succession. For generations, Egyptologists have shrugged this off. They say, well, princes died, plagues happened, it was just bad luck. But what if it wasn't bad luck? What if it was the conveniently timed crime scene that moved Amenmose out of the way so the sickly brother could have a clear path to the throne? Because there's another record of this time period. It is carved on the wall in Luxor. It is written on a papyrus scroll in the Cairo Museum. It was written in a book that most historians are terrified to use as a primary source, the Bible. If you overlay the biblical timeline onto the Egyptian timeline, the year 1486 isn't just a random date. It's exactly 40 years before the Exodus. It's the years Moses turned 40. We all know the story of Moses, right? The basket in the Nile, the princess, the burning bush. But we usually skip the middle part. We skip the part about who he actually was before he ran away. We picture Moses as a confused young man wandering around the palace in a linen kilt, trying to figure out his identity. But that's the Sunday school version. The biblical text hints at something much more formidable. In the book of Acts, Stephen stands before the Jewish High Council and gives a defense of the faith. When he describes Moses' life in Egypt, he drops a detail that should stop us in our tracks. He says, and Moses was learned in all the wisdom of the Egyptians and was mighty in words and in deeds, right? So when we take a look at this, right, he's laying out a case that, again, Moses was actually a military, again, he was a general. And if you actually read Josephus talks about how this is how Moses got his Ethiopian wife. He led a campaign into Cush, right? It was heroic, right? And long story short, he ends up marrying an Ethiopian princess as the terms of like a peace, of like a surrender and peace deal, right? So again, even Stephen talking about how Moses was mighty in words and in deeds, that's very interesting. So it goes on to say, what kind of deeds make an Egyptian prince mighty in the 18th dynasty? You didn't get called mighty for being good at math. You didn't get called mighty for overseeing grain storage. You got called mighty for one thing, war. This was the era of the warrior kings. To be mighty was to be a commander. Is it possible that the great overseer of the soldiers, Prince Amenmose, and the mighty in deeds prophet Moses are the same person? Did the greatest prophet in the Old Testament, the first unofficial king of Israel, start his life as the greatest general in the Egyptian army? And did he vanish from the Egyptian history not because he died, but because he committed a capital crime? The Bible says Moses killed an Egyptian. We read that and think of a street fight, a moment of passion. But if Moses was the crown prince, if he was the general Amenmos, then killing an official of the state wasn't just murder, it was treason. It was the political opening the rival faction had been waiting for. It was the excuse the weaker brother needed to take the throne. Suddenly, the disappearance of Prince Amenmos stops looking like a mystery and starts looking like a cover-up. The monument stopped speaking his name, not because he was dead, but because he was exiled. The general didn't fade away, he ran. And he left the door open for a tyrant to take the throne, a tyrant whose son would eventually face the very man who should have been king, right? So we're going to stop here, right? I think he makes a really good case for Amenmos. Why Amenmos is a good candidate for who Moses could be in the Egyptian record, right? Now, Dark Knight says Moses marrying a Cushite princess is why some Ethiopians say they're Israelites. Well, that wouldn't mean anything because again, she it doesn't say that he has any children with them. Now, what they do say is they say that Solomon had a child with the Queen of Sheba, and that's how they're Israelites, which I don't agree with. Right. So now what we're going to do is we're going to take a look at this article from the Armstrong Institute of Biblical Archaeology. Right. Let me make sure you guys can see my screen. Right. So this is an individual by the name of Senenmut. Right. Senenmut. Let's make sure you guys can see everything. All right, bet. All praises. Okay, so it says it's one of the biggest questions in the world of the biblical archaeology. Who was the Pharaoh of the Exodus? We explored this question in detail in the March to April 2023 issue of Let the Stone Speak. Right? Do I have it with me right here? So I actually am subscribed to this magazine, so I have a bunch of their issues. Right? Let the Stone Speak. Again, I'm really into archaeology and history, so it's a good resource, especially because we're Bible believers. All right. So it says, but what about Pharaoh's arch rival? Is there evidence for Moses in ancient Egypt? For skeptics, the answer is simply no. Moses is a fictional biblical character to whom we have no material evidence. Others might give a more nuanced version of no, one that recognizes the remarkable Egyptianisms throughout the Torah that hint at the author's familiarity with Egyptian culture. But is it true? Is there really no evidence for Moses himself? There's one particular princely individual in the New Kingdom period Egyptian history who, in many respects, remarkably parallels the biblical account of Moses. The similarities are so close, one key proponent believes the evidence is secure, that this individual is the very same man known as Moses, traditional author of the Old Testament book of Exodus and the other 4 books of the Pentateuch. Boom, period. Has the question of Moses' identity in Egyptian history been solved? Laying the groundwork. First, we need a basic chronological framework. As we established in who was the Pharaoh of the Exodus, biblical chronology puts the Exodus in the 15th century BCE. Granted, there is significant debate on this issue. Our article explains this time frame in detail. In short, 1 Kings 6:1 states that 480 years elapsed between the Exodus and the construction of Solomon's temple, which was widely recognized as beginning in 1967 BCE. This places the Exodus in 1446 BCE. Israel's entrance into Canaan 40 years later is 1406 BCE, and the conquest of Canaan at the end of the century is on into the 14th century BCE. Several other biblical passages point to the same general time frame. Examples: Judges 11:26 and 1 Chronicles 6. Right? Let me see what they got here. All right, so they have more articles. So what I'll do is I'll put the articles, the link to the articles. Let me do that right now, actually. Right, let's go ahead. Right. I am going to put boom. Where are we? Here we go. Boom. Link to the book read. Link to the article read. Let me go ahead and Amazon. Here we go. All right, so now I have the link for each particular source that we've been reading, right? So the link for the book is in the description, as well as the link to this particular article. Grab some water. All right. So it says this time frame for the Exodus, based on the biblical text, aligns remarkably with with clues from the archaeological record. For example, in the Amarna letters, 14th century BCE, panicked Canaanite leaders described an invading people referred to as Habiru, i.e. Hebrews, progressively taking all the lands. All right, see our article, Amarna letters, proof of Israel's invasion of Canaan. This overall chronological picture also matches remarkably well with the general progression of Egyptian history. As outlined in Who Was the Pharaoh of the Exodus, following a high chronology timeline, puts the pacifist Amarna period pharaoh Amenhotep IV / Akhenaten as the pharaoh during the conquest of Canaan, a pharaoh also notable for his upheaval of Egyptians' polytheistic religious system and rejection of the name Amenhotep. Interesting. It places his father Amenhotep III as a pharaoh of the wilderness sojourn, another notably pacifist pharaoh from whose reign we find our earliest archaeological reference to the Tetragrammaton, as being worshipped by nomads east of Egypt. Amenhotep III's reign is also notable for an emphasis on Sekhmet, the goddess of healing. And this puts his father, Thutmose IV, as sudden successor to Exodus Pharaoh. Thutmose I was a non-firstborn, which we established in last week's presentation, who assumed the throne under dubious circumstances as justified in his dream stele. This makes Amenhotep II, also a non-firstborn, our pharaoh of the Exodus. Interestingly, the 3rd century BCE Egyptian priest, historian Manetho, and 1st century BCE Egyptian priest Karaman identified the Exodus pharaoh by the name Amenephis, the later Greek form of Amenhotep. Amenhotep II's reign began with remarkable fury and conquest, with the pharaoh swiftly making a name for himself for his level of sadistic cruelty. Yet, this is a pharaoh for whom we know next to nothing about the latter part of his reign, save for a warning to his viceroy to be wary of foreigners and magicians, which is found in the Semna stele of Usersatet. That in the mummified body, if it is really his, covered in peculiar tubercles, right? Again, we covered this last week's episode, right? This in turn makes Amenhotep's father, Thutmose III, arguably Egypt's greatest pharaoh and one of the longest reigning, at 54 years, the primary pharaoh of the oppression during whose tenure Moses fled into the wilderness for 40 years. It puts Thutmose III's stepmother Hatshepsut as the biblical pharaoh's daughter, right? So in this particular book, the author makes the case that Queen Amos, the daughter of Pharaoh Amos I, and wife of Thutmose I, and mother of Hatshepsut, as the woman who's the daughter of Pharaoh that adopted Moses. And it makes the case that Prince Amenmos was in particular Moses, right? Here, they're going to make the case that Hatshepsut is the one who adopted Moses, right? And I'll be honest, I'm leaning more towards this one, right? But again, we're looking at who Moses could possibly be within the Egyptian record, right? So it says it puts Thutmose III's stepmother, Hatshepsut, as the biblical Pharaoh's daughter, a woman who went on to become a powerful ruler in her own right, yet one whose inscriptions attest to her, quote, heart full of love, whose spirits inclined toward foreign people, and whose monuments, strangely enough, were vandalized and defaced during the rule of our Exodus Pharaoh Amenhotep II. It puts her sickly husband and half-brother Thutmose II, father of Thutmose III, and their father Thutmose I, as the former rulers of Egypt, leading the land as described in the first part of Exodus 2. Finally, in this scheme, I would submit that it puts Thutmose I's predecessor, Kamose, as the king of Exodus 1, who knew not Joseph, right? Kamose was the pharaoh of southern Egypt, who initiated the campaign to overthrow the foreign Semitic rulers of northern Egypt and bring the Delta under sole Egyptian rule with the decree, the Carnivoran tablet, reading remarkably similar to Exodus 1, 8 through 10, right? So I'm going to have to take a look at this. I'm going to have to look into that, right? So reading remarkably similar to Exodus 1, verses 8 through 10. Kamose was killed during battle, but the overthrow was completed by his brother Amos I, who initiated the New Kingdom period in the 18th dynasty of Egypt. Within this framework, we can now focus on the period in question, namely the late 16th century BCE, with the Princess Queen Pharaoh Hatshepsut, and the remarkable rags to riches to disappearance story of a priestly figure within her administration. Hatshepsut, Egypt's greatest pharaoh's daughter. The Bible states that Moses lived 120 years and that his lifespan was divided into 3 equal parts. He spent his first 40 years as a prince in Egypt, another 40 years as an outcast in Midian, and the final 40 years as a leader of the Israelites. Exodus 7, Numbers 14:33, Deuteronomy 29:4, and 34:7, etc. Moses died just prior to the Israelites crossing into the Promised Land. Applying this detail to Israel's entry date into Canaan, circa 1406 BCE, places Moses' birth at around 1526 BCE. Okay? And then they have this particular map here, right? Not map, but timeline to demonstrate, right? So you got the second intermediate period, right? 17th dynasty, which also includes the Hyksos, right? So you got Jacob and his family entering into Egypt around, 1660 BCE. Moses being born in 1426, him disappearing in 1486. Again, the same time frame that the individual in this book laid out for his disappearance. The Exodus happened in 1446, and then Moses dying in 1406. All right. So let's go back here. It says this would place his birth somewhere within the reign of Pharaoh Thutmose I, within a fairly typical high chronology framework. The reign of Thutmose I is dated to 1526 to 1512 BCE. Professor Douglas Petrovich provides a slightly earlier time frame, circa 529 to 516 BCE. Antonio Crasto provides an even earlier reign, circa 1532 to 1519 BCE. The royal family of Thutmose I is extremely interesting. This pharaoh sired a fully royal daughter, Hatshepsut, born through the great royal wife, Amos, and a half-royal son, Thutmose II, born through a minor wife named Mutnorfret. That's a terrible name. Golly. In order to secure his son's place in Egypt and on Egypt's throne, the dying Thutmose I had his 18-year-old son marry his 24-year-old half-sister. See sidebar 2 for details about another interesting member of this family with possible connections to the biblical account. The repeated biblical emphasis on the Pharaoh's daughter is doubly interesting in the context of the court intrigue at the time. After all, this was the same emphasis placed on Hatshepsut as the fully royal daughter of the Pharaoh. It was also a position and title Hatshepsut continued to highlight on her monuments during her reign, long after her father Thutmose I's death. Applying standard high chronology dates, Hatshepsut was about 10 years old at the time of the biblical Moses discovery. Petrovich puts her at 12 years old, and applying Castro's chronology to our dates for Moses in the Exodus would make her around 15 years old. Thutmose II's reign, with Hatshepsut as his sister queen, was neither long nor impressive. He was a sickly pharaoh who did not produce a male heir through Hatshepsut. Instead, she bore him a daughter, Nefu'ure. Like his father, Thutmose II, however, did bear a male heir, Thutmose III, through a concubine named Iset. So again, Thutmose III, he ends up reigning. Thutmose III was just 2 years old when his father died. As such, his stepmother Hatshepsut initiated a 22-year co-regency during which she became a truly remarkable pharaoh in her own right. Egyptologist Sir William Flinders Petrie, the father of Egyptian archaeology, noted that Pharaoh Hatshepsut's activity seems to have been entirely given to peaceful enterprises in an age of tranquility to the realm. This is in A History of Egypt, Volume 2. One remarkable inscription on the facade of her temple at Speos Artemidos reads, in part, "My spirits incline toward foreign people. The people, Rashau and Eel, did not hide themselves from me." Emphasis added throughout. Another inscription describes a heart full of love. These extraordinary sentiments fit well with the biblical description of a pharaoh's daughter who would bring up a foreign child from poverty and catapult him into princedom. Coincidentally, during the reign of Hatshepsut, a commoner was catapulted in rank in the highest levels of Egyptian administration and princedom. Introducing mother's brother, right? Okay, so we got some schmuck over here talking about heathens being saved. Yeah, we're gonna just ban you. Get this, like we're over here looking at. We're going into history, right? About who Moses could potentially be in the Egyptian record, and we got a nigga putting on a cape for the heathen. Yeah, we're not doing that, right? So, introducing mother's brother. Egyptian history clearly shows this man was of decidedly non-royal common origin. Yet, by the end of his life in Egypt, prior to his mysterious disappearance in the early mid 1480s BCE, he had risen to the highest ranks of Egyptian society. This prince is referenced to commonly as Senenmut, right? Author and investigative journalist Scott Allen Roberts identifies this individual as none other than Moses himself. Antonio Crasto likewise identifies him as Moses in his Italian language article Senenmut. Let's cut to the quick Senenmut favored courtier to Pharaoh Hatshepsut is the very same man we know as Moses, Roberts states in his 2014 book, The Exodus Reality, co-authored with John Richard Ward. Senenmut lived under the gracious and benevolent eye of Hatshepsut, some accounts even hailing to their relationship as a possible lovers, despite the nearly 10-year age difference between them. This originally non-royal individual stunningly came to be granted nearly 90 titles bestowed on him by Hatshepsut, including hereditary crown prince of Egypt, count sole companion, master of all people, chief of the whole land, royal vizier, and chief royal architect. Sennamer's royal appointments included chief steward who conducted all the works of the king, confidant of the king, privy councillor of the right hand, chief steward of the princess Nefuere, Hatshepsut's daughter. Sennamer's administrative titles included wearer of the royal seal, steward of Amun, overseer of the granary of Amun, overseer of the storehouse of Amun. Sennamer's religious titles included chief of the prophets of Montu and Haramanthus. So this right here is making a very, very interesting case for this individual by the name of Sennamer in the Egyptian record of being Moses, right? As summarized in Hatshepsut from Queen to Pharaoh, edited by Catherine Roehrig, Renee Dreyfus, and Kathleen Keller. Sennamer held so many official offices that it is difficult to see how he was capable of carrying out even a fraction of the duties associated with them. In interrogating whether or not this individual is the biblical figure Moses, our first question, of course, must concern the name. If those are one of the same individuals, why not Moses? According to Roberts, a significant title she Hatshepsut bestowed was in the changing of his name to Sennamer, which means mother's brother. In essence, it was a title elevating a son to the status of equal with his mother, allowing him to claim equal status of brother to the gods with the pharaonic parent. Egyptian leaders commonly bore several names. One of the things that makes cross-identification between ancient sources especially difficult. The Egyptian historian Manetho describes Moses as using an entirely different Egyptian name in the Egyptian courts, while being referred to as Moses specifically by the Israelites, as quoted by first-century Jewish historian Josephus in his work Against Apion. Again, we discussed this during last week's episode. The Egyptian priest Karaman records the same, that the name Moses was only used among the Israelites. From a biblical perspective, for a Hebrew serving in Egypt's courts to bear an entirely different Egyptian name is not without precedent. Note, Joseph's Egyptian name was bestowed upon him was Zaphnath Paneah. But wasn't the name Moses an Egyptian name anyway, akin to the various Egyptian royals whose names ended in Mos or Moses? This is a common interpretation, yet it is one of the that Egyptologist Professor Kenneth Kitchen argues strenuously against. Instead, based upon the spelling of the name and the literal reading of the biblical etymology provided in Exodus 2:10, he argues that Moses was actually a strictly Hebrew name, and that this naming decision came through his mother, who served as his hired nurse for the Pharaoh's daughter, as he summarized in his 2003 book on the reliability of the Old Testament. Moses' name is widely held to be Egyptian, and its form is too often misinterpreted by biblical scholars. It is frequently equated with the Egyptian word Mos, meaning child, and stated to be an abbreviation of a name compounded with that of a deity whose name has been omitted, right? Again, this is the case that the individual who wrote this book makes for Amun-Mos, right? He makes the claim that when he was in Midian, that he dropped the name, the part of his name Amun or Amun, and just kept the Moses, right? So this scholar, he begs to differ, right? It says, and indeed we have many Egyptians called Amun-Mos, Ptah-Mos, Ra-Mos, Hor-Mos, and so on. But this explanation is wrong. The name Moses is most likely not Egyptian in the first place. The semblants do not match as they should, and this cannot be explained away. Overwhelmingly, the Egyptian S appears as Samak in Hebrew in the West Semitic, while Hebrew and West Semitic Samak appears as Tj in Egyptian. Conversely, Egyptian sh equals Hebrew sh, or the shin, as in the name of Moses, Moshe, or Masha, and vice versa. It is better to admit that the child was named by his own mother in a form originally vocalized Mashu, one drawn out, which became Moshe. He who draws out, i.e., his people from slavery when he led them forth. Right. So there you have it. If correct, this would explain the assertion of Manetho and Caramaean that the name Moses was used specifically amongst the Israelites rather than among the Egyptians. It would also logically require looking for an individual of a different name in Egyptian history, one fitting the description of Moses' life rather than the biblical Hebrew name. And in this overall context of Moses' adoption, the otherwise unusual name Sinemut would make sense, befitting an adoptive child of the young Pharaoh's daughter, in this case with Hatshepsut recognizing herself figuratively as both mother and sibling to this individual, alongside conferring upon him divine privilege. To this end, another interesting name connection might be found in the New Testament. Hebrews 11:24-25 reads, by faith, Moses, when he had become great, refused to be called son of Pharaoh's daughter, choosing rather to suffer affliction along with the people of God. Darby Bible Translation. To be called son of Pharaoh's daughter at first glance might appear to simply be passing reference to Moses' adoptive status. But could it be a hint toward the actual name of Moses in the Egyptian courts? Well, he was literally called, with the names such as mother's brother, Sinemut, a title eventually renounced by him after he had become great, casting his lot in with his Hebrew brother. I think right here, this part right here, for me, makes the most sense. This is a very interesting case that the people over at ABR, not ABR, this is the Armstrong Institute of Biblical Archaeology. So AIBA, right? ABR is a different biblical archaeological institute that I also follow, right? So where were we? All right, humble origins. Sinemut's humble origins prior to his becoming great are widely recognized. His parents carry no royal titles, and his father, who died prior to his rise to any significant power, was initially given a very simple burial, continuing from Hatshepsut, from queen to pharaoh. Sinemut, so this is the book that they previously quoted. Sinemut may justifiably be described as one of the most eminent and influential personages in the 18th dynasty. Yet nothing about his beginnings suggests future greatness. His parents were of relatively lowly origin, and neither seems to have risen to prominence or held any administrative or religious office. It seems that Sinemut grew in power. He was gradually able to afford them a somewhat better reburials. Still, mystery surrounds his family, including his parents, referred to simply as Ramos and Hatnophet. Ramos, perhaps not so far removed from the biblical name of Moses' father, Amram. In this vein, compare the biblical names of Moses' sister, Miriam, to his postulated Egyptian equivalent to Meri Amun. These parents of Sinemut are sometimes described as provincial or peasants. Rothrig continued in the context of Sinemut's parents and relatives. Indeed, there is much we do not know about popular groups in Egypt. 3 women from the Levant were taken into the harem of Thutmose III. Their ethnic identity would not have been learned had their West Semitic names not have been written on their funerary goods. However, immigrants often took Egyptian names, or their names were not recorded at all, leaving us only their bodies, possessions, and possibly grave types to tell their story. What are we to make, for instance, for the women with braided hair buried quite simply in the tomb of Sinemut's parents? Now, the fact that you got these people, these Hebrews, being buried, right, with braids, Come on now. And you think these people that live in the land of Israel, you think that these are the children of God, that these are the descendants of Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob? You got to be shitting me, right? So it says further on their intermittent, 2 rectangular coffins contain 6 additional mummies, all anonymous and almost certainly close family members. It appears that Sennamer's gradual rise to power began during the reign of Hatshepsut's father, Thutmose I, thus the biblical pharaoh of the pharaoh's daughter, and part of his initial rise appears to be in the context of military prowess against the Ethiopians. Sennamer's exploits. Sennamer appears to have risen through the ranks in military service from his late teens onward. Crasto notes that he participated in military campaigns in the land of Kush, or Ethiopia, where he appears to have attained rank perhaps as a brigade commander. For those familiar with the classical accounts of Moses' life, this is significant because while his exploits in Ethiopia are not mentioned in the Bible, with only the faintest hint given in Numbers 12 and 1, they are mentioned at length by certain classical historians. Josephus dedicates an entire chapter of Antiquities of the Jews to Moses' military exploits in Ethiopia. A similar account comes from the 3rd century BCE Jewish historian Artapanus. See our article, Evidence of Moses' Conquest of Ethiopia, right? So again, this link right here to this particular article is in the description, right? All these other articles that they have links to, right? These are also good reads, all right? I'm going to read, I've read most of this article. Did not read, for instance, this particular article. All right. So it says, it was not, however, until Hatshepsut came to power that Sennamer began to be catapulted into in the rank with the litany of titles she applied to him. So much so that Egyptologist Professor Joyce Towlesley refers to him as the greatest of the great in the court of Hatshepsut, her most influential courtier. Effectively, Sennamer was ruler of Egypt, she writes. The greatest sign of how incredibly close these two were, Sennamer and Hatshepsut, was the proximity between Sennamer and the daughter of Hatshepsut, Nefer-Ure, whom he tutored. Several statues depict the young princess Nefer-Ure sitting in his lap. Normally, non-royals were not allowed in the close presence of royalty, let alone the daughter of a pharaoh. The representation in sculpture of royal Nefer-Ure and the non-royal Sennamer person together is unprecedented and abrogates a number of seemingly violate rules of Egyptian art. Rohrig explained, these include the general convention that a royal person, even a child, is represented in a larger scale than non-royalty, that a royal individual is never touched except by another royal person or a deity, and that a royal person never interacts in an obvious way with, let alone touches, a person of lower rank. T. George Allen, in his 1927 article, A Unique Statue of Sennamer, calls these statues a startling innovation, that he, Sennamer, an ordinary non-royal person, should venture to have himself portrayed, and not once, but 5 times at least, in such intimate association with a scion of God-descendant royalty, is a final proof of his queen's unparalleled graciousness. Even the general quantity of statues relating to this man are remarkable, because so many of Sennamer's statues have survived. The size of his corpus is parallel only by that of royalty, Hatshepsut from the queen to pharaoh. Yet, lacking distinguished lineage, Sennamer could not, like some of his illustrious contemporaries, suggest his participation in the cycle of eternal renewal by depicting his extended family. Nor did he apparently have any children, so there would be no future generations to maintain his funerary cult. He stood alone. This is another remarkable peculiarity that is often pointed out for an individual in such high office, his lack of wife and children, but this again matches perfectly with the biblical portrayal of Moses while in the courts of Egypt. Still, Sennamer's closeness to the queen naturally led to rumors of an affair between them. To this day, a lewd graffito can be found of them left by an ancient workman on a hidden stone surface in Deir el-Bahari. Nevertheless, theories of a romantic connection between Hatshepsut and Sennamer were largely debunked in Peter Dorman's 1988 study, The Monuments of Sennamer: Problems in Historical Methodology. Royal Architect. Now, this is where stuff starts to get really, really interesting, family. It says, one of the greatest achievements attributed to Sennamer is his role as royal architect, overseeing the construction of Hatshepsut's grand mortuary complex in Deir el-Bahari. This complex, built against the cliff face, remains one of the veritable wonders of the ancient world, known for its architectural proportioning and perfection. It consists of a large colonnaded courtyard complex centered around an inner sanctum, or a Jesaru, holies of holies, right? So it says such architectural connections are also interesting in light of the biblical Moses. Moses, of course, oversaw the construction of the tabernacle as well as the construction of another pillared complex in the desert against the mountainside in Exodus 24:4. Even the biblical account of Moses and the Hebrew workmen is interesting in light of this context. What was Moses doing at the construction site manned by Hebrews and Egyptians? Was Moses working on an administrative position as ruler and judge, primarily over the Egyptian workmen? Could this event have even taken place at the site like Deir el-Bahari? In addition to the construction of Hatshepsut's mortuary complex, like any high-ranking member of Egyptian administration, Sennamer had his own sufficiently respectable twin tomb complex constructed, Tomb 71 and Tomb 353. These tombs contain several fascinating and unique features, such as a detailed star map ceiling, the earliest star map ever discovered in Egypt, leading to speculation that Sennamer was also an astronomer. Professor, I might want to try to pronounce that, describes the unique astronomical ceiling in his Tomb 353 and the eclectic variety of texts in ostraca, including the Tomb 71, ranging from plans of the tomb itself through various calculations of the story of Sinhue. Certainly suggests that Sennamer was a cultured and well-rounded man with a wide range of interests extending far beyond his official duties. But Sennamer was never buried in his tomb. In fact, his tomb was never even finished, but instead were prematurely closed. He decorated the decorated tomb of 353 was abandoned and sealed while still full of excavated chip and workmen's tools, and his quartzite sarcophagus was left unfinished in the corridor of Tomb 71. Right? It appears Sennamer, for whatever reason, completely disappeared without a trace. Sennamer's sudden disappearance is one which has teased Egyptologists for decades. The lack of solid archaeological and textual evidence allowing the vivid imagination of Sennamer's scholars to run wild and resulting in a variety of fervently held solutions, some of which would do credit to any fictional murder mystery plot. A murder mystery plot. Words that might be more apropos than intended, because this was, of course, the entire premise of Moses' sudden disappearance from Egypt. We have no dated reference to Sennamer after year 1819 of Hatshepsut / Thutmose III's co-regency. He is shown with Princess Neferu on the stele of year 11 at Sinai, and the last dated document containing his name is an informal record of conscript labor on an ostrakhan from year 16. Standard high chronology, which places the beginning of Hatshepsut / Thutmose III's co-regency circa 1504 BCE, would put his final mention of Senemu at circa 1486 BCE, the 40th year of our biblical Moses. Applying other chronological variants, such as that of Petrovich and Crasto, would put his final discovered mention of Senemu a few years earlier. Roberts notes this remarkable synchronism. Somewhere around 1486 or 1485 BCE, Senemu disappears completely off the Egyptian scene. Incidentally, if you're keeping up on the mathematics, if Moses was born in 1526 BCE, he would have turned 40 in 1486 BCE, the same year he is said to have murdered the Egyptian taskmaster and fled Egypt, in the same approximate year that Senemu completely disappears from Egypt. The chronology of his life is a perfect match, and the fact that he leaves without anything ever being said about it in the Egyptian record might be an indicator of who truly he is. But a clue as to where he went might be gleaned from his literature library. As mentioned in the 12th dynasty Egyptian literary epic, the story of Senhue was found in his tomb. This classic describes the protagonist, Senhue, fleeing Egypt into the Levant in order to escape the pharaoh's wrath, following the assassination of King Amenemhet I. It describes Senhue dwelling with Bedouin and marrying the daughter of a chieftain. Now, put a 1 in the chat if that is making a lot of sense to you. This makes a lot of sense. And this is why I'm leaning with Hatshepsut being the daughter of Pharaoh and this individual Senemu being Moses, right? Now, again, the author of this book made a really good case for Prince Amenmos and Queen Amos being the daughter of Pharaoh and Moses, but this right here is just kind of sealing the deal for me, right? So let me check, right? All praise to the Most High. Now, it says Egyptologist Professor James Homier notes that despite several key differences, these same features are found in the story of Moses in Exodus. These striking similarities between the main elements of the story of Senhue and Moses have surprisingly not attracted the attention of biblical scholars. One wonders, could Senemu, who would have been familiar with this epic, have used it as a model for his own course of action in fleeing Egypt following the murder of an Egyptian workman? All right, so this is a papyrus bearing the story of Senhue, right? Now, I'm not sure what this even means. Damnatio memoriae. The disappearance of Senemu is not the end of the story. After his departure, many of his monuments and inscriptions suffered the curse of damnatio memoriae, intentional erasure, damnation of memory. It's interesting, too, that the same fate befell the monuments of Hatshepsut. That is a very interesting point, because if this is Moses and he got elevated under this woman, Hatshepsut, and her records and her monuments are being defaced during the reign of Amenhotep I, who is our pharaoh of the Exodus. And this is a man who murdered an Egyptian, and he's a foreigner. Yeah, that makes a lot of sense. Senemu suffered a series of posthumous attacks of his memory, like so much of his life. In the life of Senemu, the reason for the attacks on the inscriptions of his name remains, for the moment, a mystery. Egyptologist Professor Alan Schulman wrote that his 2 tombs apparently had been thoroughly vandalized, with his name and portraits maliciously and vindictively expunged. The splendid quartzite sarcophagus, which had been found in his first tomb, had been shattered into fragments. Cinema had been the victim of someone's implacable hatred, proposing Thutmose III as responsible. That makes sense. Roberts differs with regards to such an earlier theories of Thutmose III as responsible for the dematio memorare of Cinema and Hatshepsut. Newer information states that Thutmose III did not disgrace or remove any of her images. It was not done under the order of Thutmose III. It was his son, Amenhotep II, our pharaoh of the Exodus, who ordered their removal. And what's even more interesting is that at the same time he removed the image of Hatshepsut, he also removes all images of Senenmut. Makes a lot of sense. Why? A reconstruction of events following the biblical account of Moses and the Pharaoh's daughter would explain exactly why. This damnatio memorare was not entirely complete. However, several of Senenmut's statues and inscriptions survive, one of which bears the strange inscription, the steward Senenmut, it is who was come forth from the flood, and to whom has been given the inundation that he may control it, even the Nile. Could this individual, after all, really be the individual of infamy, the man who was brought forth from the Nile? Could it be Moses? My answer is, I think that this is the guy. I think that this individual, Senenmut, is Moses in the Egyptian record. It just makes all the sense in the world. And here's the thing, right? We live in a world where so-called scholars, right, they will use the Bible to prove something, but then use something else to try to say that the Bible is fake and all these stories, this is just a myth and blah, 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 blah. The hypocrisy within academia concerning the Bible is insane, right? It says you will have to form your own opinion. Personally, I was initially skeptical. It seemed like a story too good to be true, and one that would come apart in details. Yet, while there remain some unknowns, the more I researched the history, the more plausible it becomes. A level of skepticism was highlighted by Scott Roberts himself. When I was in my seminary days under the professorship of Dr. Allen, I presented my theory that Moses was raised by Hatshepsut. Even back then, some 30 years ago, the good doctor advised me to use great care because although the facts fit, the story borders on being far too romanticized, that Moses should be raised by the heir to the throne rather than what was more probable in his view, a harem wife or daughter. In the end, whatever your conclusion about Senenmut, the question of his identity as the biblical Moses is not the ultimate takeaway. Instead, it is the fact that this overall picture of the late 16th, early 15th century BCE Egypt, politically and religiously, is the precise fit for the biblical sequence of events, and milieu in which the biblical Moses could be raised by Pharaoh's daughter to become Prince of Egypt. In the words of Professor Toddlesley, gradually as her reign progressed, Hatshepsut started to appoint new advisors, many of whom were men of relatively humble birth, such as Senenmut. Could another such individual within the administration have been the biblical Moses? It is certainly possible. Ultimately, however, this benevolence towards the humble and foreigners disappeared under the iron rule of Thutmose III and Amenhotep II, with the latter's ultimate erasure of such and his warnings against foreigners. Is there no evidence for Moses in the Egyptian record? The answer isn't as simple or straightforward as some might claim. Truth is, it's a fascinating, multifaceted question, and one that brings to the fore some truly remarkable parallel between Egyptian history and the biblical text. Right. So now, there's a couple of sidebars here. I actually haven't read the first sidebar. I did read the second sidebar. Second sidebar is really, really interesting, and it looks like we're doing pretty decent on time, right? So let's get into it, right? So sidebar 1, low chronology or high chronology, a deal breaker. As outlined here in the Who Was the Pharaoh of the Exodus, this alignment of biblical and historical events follows high chronology of Egyptian history. This sometimes comes under criticism from certain Egyptologists and enthusiasts who follow the popular low chronology. A scheme which effectively places this chain of new kingdom period rulers several decades later. For example, at circa 1446 BCE, Exodus on a low chronology scheme would place it in the middle of the surging reign of Thutmose III. This prompts the question: does this entire early Exodus outline stand or fall based on the accuracy of the high chronology over low? Not necessarily. Interestingly, there is a textual variant in 1 Kings 6:1 found in the 2nd century BCE Septuagint, which gives 440 years from the Exodus to the start of the construction of Solomon's temple. It is still a matter of debate as to why the LXX gives 440 years, as opposed to the 480 of the Masoretic text as found in most Bibles. One opinion is that such numbers in the biblical text were originally written with symbols, i.e. hieratic, that were only lately transcribed into full words, i.e. 480 versus 480. And this was simply the result of a scribal error in reading the original symbol on the part of either the LXX or the Masoretic text copyists. Nonetheless, this alternative 440-year period would put the X's near the end of the reign of Amenhotep II on the low chronology scheme, effectively also aligning the rest of the described events with the same respective pharaohs. So either way, it still works. It is in my contention that the chain of events in the ancient Egyptian history, from Kamose, the pharaoh who knew not Joseph, all the way to Akhenaten, the pharaoh of the conquest of Canaan, is too perfect to be anything other than a fit for the chain of biblical events. And again, it is my contention that the high chronology is the correct scheme in conjunction with the Masoretic text 480-year period. But for those who may take issue with this particular interpretation, the Egyptian chronology, they may draw the same general conclusions between low chronology and the LXX's 440 years, right? So now, sidebar 2. Is this the biblical Bethia, daughter of Pharaoh, right? So a peculiar individual referred to as Bethia, the daughter of Pharaoh, who became the wife of an Israelite named Mered, is buried within the genealogies of the first book of Chronicles, in 1 Chronicles 4 and 18, right? So let's go get that real quick, right? 1 Chronicles 4 and 18. All right, I found this super fascinating, family, when I first took a look at it, right? So I'm going to start. All right, so Caleb, we know Caleb is a Judite, right? So 1 Chronicles 4:15, the sons of Caleb, the son of Jephunneh, Eru, Elah, and Naam, the son of Elah, Kenaz, the sons of Jehalalel, Ziphah, Teriah, and Asarel, the sons of Ezra, Jether, Mered, right? Mered, Epher, and Jalon. These are the sons of Bethia, the daughter of Pharaoh, whom Mered married, and she conceived and bore Miriam, Shammai, and Ishba, the father of Eshtemoa. And his Judahite wife bore Jared, the father of Gedor, Heber, the father of Sukkot, and Jukthiel, the father of Zanoah, right? So there is an individual, right? So again, mind you, this is around Caleb. Caleb is during what? The Exodus, right? He was around wandering in the wilderness, right? And him and Joshua, they entered into the land. So this is all within that same time frame, right? So now let's come back here, right? It says the passage lists the sons she conceived. It is possible to identify this individual with a princess in Egyptian history, right? Or is it possible? Is the question. The exact chronological position of this particular genealogy is hard to pin down. Nevertheless, Jewish tradition links it to the period just before the Exodus. This would make sense given the connection to Egypt, as well as the names that appear. Verse 17 mentions a Miriam, a name well known from the Exodus period and widely believed to be of Egyptian derivation. The name Mered means rebellion, aptly signifying this period of upheaval. And further attesting to the early nature of this passage are the names of fathers of who later became Israelite cities in the Promised Land: Sukkot, Gedor, and Zanoah. Interesting, right? When I saw that, like Sukkot, I'm like, that's a city. These factors would logically lead us to look for an Egyptian princess, Bethia, somewhere around this Exodus setting, within the late 16th to 15th century BCE, and there is a tantalizing fit with the pharaoh's daughter of a very similar name, who likewise disappears from the Egyptian record later in her life, the sister of Hatshepsut. As described above, Hatshepsut was the renowned, fully royal daughter of Pharaoh Thutmose I and his great royal wife, Amos. But Hatshepsut was not the only fully royal Pharaoh's daughter. She had a younger sister named Neferubiti, right? So Hatshepsut had a daughter named Neferure, and she had a sister named Neferubiti, right? Neferu means beautiful. Like, for instance, Nefertiti, right? It means beauty of something. Among the detailed reliefs at Hatshepsut's Deir el-Bahari mortuary complex is an image of her mother, Amos, father Thutmose I, and sister Neferubiti, depicted as a young girl. This image and accompanying hieroglyphic text is all that is known of her. After this, she completely disappears from the record. A typical assumption is that she died young. Her name, Neferubiti, is interesting, consisting of two parts, Neferu and Biti, transliterated as right here, right? Neferu or Nefer is a common name element meaning beauty or beautiful. Her sister, Hatshepsut's own daughter, was named Neferure, beauty of the god Re or Ra. Her father, Thutmose I's miner's wife named Mut Nofret, means the goddess Mut is beautiful. If I'm not mistaken, I believe that's the goddess of death, Mut, which is the equivalent of the Hebrew word Mawaf, which means death. On the extreme end of the spectrum, there is the famous 14th century BCE Queen Nefertiti, or in full, Neferuaten, right? Beautiful are the beauties of the god Aten. A beautiful woman has come. The name element BT could be translated as B. Also, this hieroglyph is representative of Lower Egypt, the location of the land of Goshen, where the main body of Israelites dwelled. Interesting. In point of comparison, the Hebrew name Bethia is properly pronounced Bitia. That's what they're saying, right? Could Neferubiti, then beautiful Biti, be a name match for our princess Bitia of the Bible? The name dating connection with the already remarkable Hatshepsut and even her disappearance from the Egyptian record would be a good fit for the biblical account. So that's super interesting, right? And as we just went ahead and read in this article, in this book, we looked at who Moses could potentially be within the Egyptian record, right? All praise to the Most High, right? So like I said, didn't do a full presentation, just wanted to go into this book and into this this article from the Armstrong Institute of Biblical Archaeology on who Moses could potentially be in the Egyptian record. So we have Amen-Mos, we have Prince Amen-Mos, and we have Senenmut, right? Whose name literally means mother's brother. All praise to the Most High. All praise to the Most High. brother. Any questions, family? Any questions? Any questions? Again, family, make sure that you guys, again, like, share the video. If you're not subscribed, subscribe, hit that bell icon so that you get notified whenever I go live or whenever we drop a regular video, right? Make sure that you follow me on all these social media platforms, right? At LionOfYahawah on Instagram, TikTok, Twitch, in X/Twitter, right? Facebook, Ariala, Yasharahla, right? My cash is down here if you brothers and sisters want to donate to the ministry, if it's on your heart. Again, right here in this corner, you can scan this to make your way over to HIBofficialZion.com, get a copy of the Hebrew Israelite Bible, right? Any questions, family? Any questions? All right. Looks like there's no questions, family. But again, with that, I want to give all praises, all glory, all honor to the Most High God, whose name is Yahawah. Of course, I do so in the name of His only begotten Son, Yahawashi, who the world ignorantly calls Jesus Christ. I pray you, brothers and sisters, will edify. Until next time, Shalawam and Matawathya.